How to improve HR decision-making. An introduction. Why we get it wrong. Our education teaches us to think, but not necessarily how to think. Human resource management decisions are generally highly complex because people are highly sophisticated beings. Yet HR decisions appear to be simpler than they are because they arise in a practical context. We like to play safe in the name of consistency and rely too heavily on both repetition of past actions and doing what others do. Our prejudices are generally invisible to ourselves, and our forms of reasoning are highly subject to philosophical fallacies. Even in an international business, there is a tendency to think parochially or in a vague, general way, rather than to think about the impact of different laws, cultures, and economics on the operations that we manage. We spend too much time doing what is urgent and too little on doing what is important. We internalize the skepticism of line managers about the necessity of the HR function to a point where insecurity leads to conformity. Everyone likes the person who conforms, except, of course, the person themselves. This is because conformity is doing whatever everybody else is doing, regardless of what is right. This is the reverse of morality, which is doing what is right, regardless of whatever everybody else is doing. Getting it right. When making HR decisions, we want to be right in a number of ways. We want the outcome to be timely, efficient, and effective to avoid and resolve problems and minimize risks. We want it to be economical and businesslike to meet bottom line concerns. We want to be legally compliant and to follow good employment practices. Also, to be fair and ethical, to treat people in a consistent and humane way. And of course, we want to be respected by colleagues and other members of our professional community. But getting it right is often impossible because many of these factors conflict and time pressures force us to cut corners. We are forced to compromise. Once we begin to compromise in such a way, it is likely we will continue to compromise to the point where all decisions amount to mere fudge. We even lose sight of the managerial botches we are making. Risks will no longer be objectively assessed and may even be ignored altogether. The only concern will be how to avoid blame when things go wrong. The difficulty with reality is also that facts will sometimes lead us to answers that we, or relevant others, do not wish to confront. Even if we started off with a concern for what is right, the pressures of biased and inconsistent thinking around us forces us to fudge, botch, and even condone bad decisions. The key to clear thinking. But there is no real excuse for sloppy thinking, and even if compromises have to be made, they should be seen for what they are, a reluctant necessity. So how do we raise the quality of our decision-making? How do we think in a way that does not crumble under day-to-day pressures? The starting point for good HR decision-making is not intellect, but courage. To think efficiently and rationally can slow down decision-making. It can also lead to unpopular outcomes. We need the courage to be more methodical and tell other managers that there are either better alternatives to do things or that there is no right answer, as all courses of action are full of attendant risks. Ways of thinking. It is common for those in business environments to dismiss abstract thinking because it is seen as academic, sterile, divorced from reality, and not based on experience, and therefore likely to be wrong. But we all think abstractly for much of our waking days. In fact, an inability to operate in an abstract world means we barely think at all. Consider viewing CVs, curriculum vitae, for a job. As we look at them, we come to a conclusion that some candidates are underqualified, some qualified, and others overqualified. We have set aside from applicants a particular quality or attribute, level of qualification, and an equally abstract measure relative to a particular job requirement. These categories can be applied to all new candidates, and they are all abstractions. In coming to a conclusion about categories of qualification, we are also carrying out another fundamental process of objective thinking, generalization. Generalization is the formation of concepts. What, for instance, satisfies the category qualified? Applicants may have all kinds of individual qualifications from different institutions and different countries. To know what the concept qualified means, we need to come to a view about the common quality of credentials. Our concepts can be sophisticated. We adopt a rank order of awarding bodies, or they can be very basic. We just accept the title of the qualification in the way that an automated shortlisting system may do. To form concepts, we also need to make judgments. A judgment is the process of comparing two or more things to determine if they are in agreement or disagreement. We may, for instance, observe that a foreign candidate has a licence and draw the conclusion that this is equivalent to a university degree. The final fundamental element of objective thinking is reasoning itself. Reasoning is a highly sophisticated process, and virtually all of us can do it. The problem is that we are often tired, in a hurry, or just lazy, and reasoning is effectively then set aside. We take shortcuts and do not detect common fallacies in the reasoning process. At its simplest, reasoning is the comparison of two ideas or things with a third idea or thing. Take, for instance, the simple proposition that all organisations representing workers are called trade unions. The XYZ organisation claims to represent workers. Therefore, XYZ is a trade union. This appears on the surface to be a solid piece of reasoning, but there are fundamental weaknesses in the reasoning process. The premise, the basic first statement, all organisations representing workers are called trade unions, is not true. There are other organisations that represent workers, such as trade councils, or works councils, or political parties. The second proposition is also weak, as the representation of workers is also a claim and not a proven fact. For these reasons, the conclusion is flawed. False reasoning. Learning to think systematically and accurately for oneself is in itself a tiring process. Most of us have grown into adulthood being free to come to conclusions in our own way. We have developed our own methods to reduce effort, and if unsure of any decision, we have always got the option of consulting others. Moreover, we are, of course, equally aware that a decision is worthless unless it can be applied effectively. Therefore, personality and credibility are also important factors in decision-making. We shall come to these factors in subsequent course modules, but let us first look at 10 types of common reasoning errors. The first of these is begging the question. This is an attempt to explain something by applying another name to it, as in claiming that the rise in employee rudeness is due to a greater tendency to insubordination. A closely related fallacy is arguing in a circle. This often takes place when it can be hidden in a long argument. For instance, an employee can be called the company's best potential talent, and then it is subsequently claimed that the company must be good because it employs the best potential talent. One of the most frequently used fallacies is that of shifting the ground. This is pretending to prove one thing whilst actually proving another thing. An example is saying that an employee is a bad worker because they have the worst absence record, then claiming someone is a dedicated worker because they work more overtime than anyone else. Closely related to shifting the ground is the partial proof fallacy. Here, a conclusion is reached because of no conclusive evidence. An example of this is to accuse an absent employee of working during their absence because they were seen carrying garden tools. My favourite fallacy is the non sequitur. This is a conclusion or statement that does not logically follow from the previous argument or statement. The simplest non sequitur is 1. If X is true, then Y is true. Step 2. X is false. Step 3. Therefore, Y is false. Another variant is called the undistributed middle. Here is an example. 1. All employees in our Zagreb plant speak excellent English. 2. Bojana has yet to take our English proficiency test. 3. Therefore, Bojana is not qualified to work at our Zagreb plant. A kind of non sequitur is the unrelated response, sometimes called evading the question, and a favourite of politicians. It can either be totally unrelated to the question asked or be very defensive. Manager: I asked you to complete the monthly car fleet report last night. Where is it? Cost accountant: we are extending the range of available leased cars next month. Did I tell you? There are a great many statistical fallacies, and the most common hinges on the concept of the average. HR professionals frequently rely on average pay figures to determine market rates for a job. However, because pay differences tend to widen as they go from minimum levels to highest paying rates, the average is always higher than the median or middle rate in a selection of comparable rates. It may also be that there is a cluster of pay rates, the mode, which better defines the true rate for a job. Percentages seem to be a simple enough concept. However, it is important to remember that they relate to a specific starting reference line and can therefore differ if negative or positive. Thus, a 50% pay cut will require a 100% pay increase to bring it back to the original pay level. Statistical correlations measure the association between one factor and another. A high correlation may exist between attendance on a customer training course and subsequent sales performance. But this does not mean that there is a causal relationship between attendance on the course and sales levels. It may mean that places were limited on the course and therefore only the high-performing or best potential sales personnel were admitted onto it. And finally, there is the fallacy of proportionality. Many disputes occur between people because of the failure to respect the rules of proportionality. In common parlance, it is called making a mountain out of a molehill. It can take numerous forms, however, here is one of the most common. An interview panel is seeing 5 candidates for a job. After each interview, they discuss their notes and reveal the positive and negative points that they have observed. At the end, they pool their negative and positive scores for each candidate and select the candidate with the highest positive relative to negative score. This may appear to be a very objective and fair process, but it fails to address 2 fundamental issues. Firstly, how significant were the negative and positive points, and were the negative points trivial? Secondly, surely the best candidate is the one with the least negative points. A panel will be interviewing against a job specification, and someone meeting the specification will probably have neither negative nor positive scores. We are all sometimes guilty of poor reasoning, and it is no fallacy to say that poor reasoning underlies bad decision-making. But the measure of good decision-making is not that it is simply safe, but that it makes a significant impact on the fortunes of an organisation. HR is all too often viewed as a service organisation doing the bidding of line managers. But in a high-performing organisation, it also makes a direct contribution to the bottom line. HR decisions can be both dynamic and strategic in nature, but only if HR professionals are prepared to challenge the assumptions and expectations of those they serve. The value of a decision is not defined by how neatly it fits into the predispositions of colleagues, but by how much it is based on logic, evidence, and proportionality. In the following modules, we will examine decision-making in a number of practical contexts, starting with recruitment.